The conference room falls into the kind of silence that precedes catastrophe. Karen's text message blazes across the 70-inch screen in letters large enough to be read from space. Just sat through another meeting with Alfred Sinclair. God, he's such a hot, arrogant guy. Those eyes should be illegal in the workplace. 27 executives stare. The projector hums. And in the back of the room, Alfred Sinclair, 6 feet 3 inches of devastating composure in a midnight blue Tom Ford suit, doesn't move, doesn't blink, just watches her with those allegedly illegal eyes, a ghost of something unreadable crossing his face. Karen's heart stops beating, her career stops existing, and her entire world shifts on its axis. What happens next will change everything. The morning began like every other Tuesday in Karen Monroe's meticulously organized life. Alarm at 6:15, French press coffee by 6:32, subway by 7:05, desk by 7:48. 14 minutes to review the Pemberton merger documents before the 8 o'clock all-hands meeting that would determine whether she'd finally make junior partner at Sinclair and Reed. 28 years old, Yale Law, top 5% of her class, and 3 years of 80-hour weeks had brought her to this moment, this meeting, this presentation. She smoothed her charcoal Armani blazer, the one that had cost half a month's rent but screamed, "Take me seriously," and gathered her files. The Manhattan skyline stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 43rd floor, a forest of steel and ambition catching the September morning light. Ready to make history, Jessica Chen, her closest friend at the firm, appeared at her cubicle with 2 lattes and a knowing smile. "Today's your day, Karen. I can feel it. Don't jinx it." Karen accepted the coffee like a lifeline. If I can just get through this presentation without Sinclair finding something to criticize, he criticizes everyone. It's his love language. He doesn't have a love language. He has a destroy-your-soul-with-one-glance language. Jessica laughed. "You know, half the firm is in love with him, right? That whole brooding billionaire thing works for some people." Karen rolled her eyes, but something uncomfortable twisted in her chest. Because yes, Alfred Sinclair was objectively stunning. All sharp cheekbones and Arctic blue eyes, and that infuriating way he rolled up his shirt sleeves during late meetings, exposing forearms that suggested he did more than push papers. But he was also exacting, impossible to please, and had a reputation for chewing through associates like a shark through seals. "He's attractive the way a storm is attractive," Karen muttered. "Beautiful, powerful, and absolutely capable of destroying everything in its path. Poetic." Jessica checked her phone. 7:54. Showtime. The conference room was already filling when they arrived. Senior partners claimed seats around the Brazilian rosewood table, while associates lined the walls like expensive furniture. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Chrysler Building in the distance, and the scent of fresh coffee mingled with competing designer colognes. Karen moved to the front of the room, connecting her laptop to the presentation system. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled up the merger analysis. 6 months of work, distilled into 37 slides that would either elevate her career or confirm she'd never be more than competent. 2 minutes. Michael Reed, the firm's co-founder and the only person who occasionally smiled, took his seat. "Let's make this efficient, people. We have the Pemberton representatives arriving at 9:30. The door opened one last time. Alfred Sinclair entered the way he did everything, with the kind of presence that didn't require announcement. Conversation didn't stop so much as pause, recalibrate, resume at a lower frequency. He was the youngest senior partner in the firm's 68-year history, a self-made force who'd built his fortune in venture capital before deciding law was where he wanted to reshape industries. He wore authority like other men wore cologne. At 36, He'd already destroyed 3 competitors, saved 2 Fortune 500 companies, and allegedly never lost a negotiation. His suits were bespoke, his ties understated, his dark hair perpetually in that state between perfectly styled and carelessly tousled that probably took his stylist an hour to achieve, and those eyes, steel blue and absolutely merciless. They found Karen immediately. She forced herself not to look away, even as her pulse kicked into overdrive. This was professional. This was business. This was not the moment to remember how he'd stayed late last Thursday, helping her untangle a contract clause. His voice low and patient, his proximity making her forget words. Professional. Business. Not personal. "Ms. Monroe," his voice carried across the room. Cultured, controlled, with the faintest hint of a British accent from his years at Oxford. "Whenever you're ready." Which meant, "Don't waste my time." Karen straightened her spine and pulled up the first slide. "Good morning, everyone. Today I'll be presenting our analysis of the Pemberton-Lowell merger, with specific focus on the antitrust implications and recommended negotiation strategy." She clicked to the next slide. Found her rhythm. This was her territory. The research, the analysis, the carefully constructed argument. She'd lived with this merger for 6 months, knew every comma in every contract, every precedent that mattered. Her voice grew stronger as she moved through the presentation. She caught approving nods from partners. Even Alfred leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable but attentive. She was nailing this. 20 minutes in, she reached the critical section, the valuation analysis that would determine bargaining position. "Based on comparable transactions and market conditions, we recommend an opening position of 850 million, with flexibility to—" Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. Professionals didn't check phones during presentations. It buzzed again and again. Probably Jessica, she thought. Probably some encouraging text that could wait. She pulled out her phone one-handed, intending to silence it without looking. That's when everything went wrong. Later, she would never be entirely sure how it happened. A thumb swipe that went too far, a Bluetooth connection she'd forgotten about. The universe deciding to humble her. The conference room screen flickered. Her phone display appeared where her presentation slide should be, and there, in letters large enough to be read from New Jersey, was her text thread with Jessica from earlier that morning. Jessica. "Sinclair just walked by. Looked particularly murdery today." Karen, LOL. "Just sat through another meeting with Alfred Sinclair. God, he's such a hot, arrogant guy. Those eyes should be illegal in the workplace. Also pretty sure he could criticize water for being too wet." Jessica. "You're obsessed." Karen. "I'm professionally tortured. There's a difference." Jessica. "Sure there is. And I'm sure your dreams about him are super professional too." Time did something strange, stretched, crystallized. Karen watched 27 executives read her private thoughts about her boss, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock to poorly concealed amusement. Her throat closed, her vision narrowed. And in the back of the room, Alfred Sinclair sat perfectly still, his face unreadable as carved marble, those allegedly illegal eyes locked on the screen, then on her. Karen's voice came out strangled. Her fingers fumbled with her phone, trying to disconnect, but her hands had apparently forgotten how to function. "This isn't... I didn't mean to..." Someone coughed. It sounded like suppressed laughter. Finally, mercifully, she managed to close the connection. Her presentation slides returned, but it was far too late. The damage was catastrophic and irreversible. "I apologize," she managed, her face burning hot enough to cook breakfast. "Technical error. If I can just..." "I think," Alfred said quietly, his voice cutting through her panic like a scalpel, "we've seen enough for today." The words landed like a death sentence. Michael Reed cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps we should take a 15-minute break. Karen, why don't you step outside for a moment? Get some air. Translation: remove yourself before this gets worse. She gathered her things with hands that shook, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The walk to the door felt like a perp walk, every step broadcast in humiliating slow motion. Behind her, she heard whispers starting, the kind of gossip that would be all over the firm by lunch. The hallway was blessedly empty. Karen made it to the bathroom, locked herself in a stall, and pressed her forehead against the cool metal door. Her career was over, not damaged, not set back, over. You didn't call a senior partner a hot, arrogant guy in front of the entire executive team and survive. You didn't expose your unprofessional thoughts about your boss and get promoted. You packed your desk and updated your resume and hoped the story didn't follow you to your next firm. Her phone buzzed. Jessica. Oh my God. Are you okay? That was... I don't even have words. Where are you? Karen couldn't even formulate a response. She stared at the screen until it went dark, then stayed in the stall for 10 more minutes, trying to figure out how to resign with dignity when you had none left. Finally, she emerged, splashed cold water on her face, practiced her resignation speech in the mirror. The hallway was still empty when she stepped out, except it wasn't. Alfred Sinclair stood 15 feet away, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, looking like every fantasy and nightmare she'd ever had rolled into 6 feet, 3 inches of immaculate tailoring. Waiting for her. Ms. Monroe, he said softly, I think you and I need to have a conversation. And somehow, impossibly, this was about to get worse. Karen's first instinct was to run, her second was to apologize, her third was to simply cease existing. She did none of these things. Instead, she stood frozen in the hallway outside the ladies' room, watching Alfred Sinclair watch her with an expression that gave away absolutely nothing. The morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows cast shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the dangerous intelligence in those blue eyes. Mr. Sinclair, she began, her voice steadier than she felt. I want to apologize for what happened in there. It was unprofessional and inappropriate, and I take full responsibility. I'll have my resignation on your desk within the hour. One dark eyebrow lifted fractionally. Will you? It wasn't a question. Yes. She forced herself to meet his gaze, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. I've compromised my position at the firm and created an uncomfortable situation. The only appropriate response is to remove myself. How noble. Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, maybe, or calculation. And what makes you think I want your resignation, Ms. Monroe? The question landed like a grenade in still water. Karen faltered. I called you a hot, arrogant guy in front of the entire executive team. I think that rather clearly indicates that you find me attractive and difficult to work with. He pushed off from the wall, closing the distance between them with 3 measured steps. Still professional. Still appropriate, but suddenly the hallway felt much smaller. Neither of which is grounds for termination at this firm unless we're planning to lose half our associates. Heat flooded her cheeks again. That's not... I didn't mean... Didn't you? He tilted his head slightly, studying her the way he studied contracts, looking for weaknesses, loopholes, leverage. Because from where I was sitting, Ms. Monroe, that message seemed remarkably sincere. Particularly the part about my eyes being illegal in the workplace. Karen wanted the marble floor to open and swallow her whole. I was joking with a friend. I never intended for anyone to see that, least of all you. Clearly. A pause, weighted with something she couldn't identify. Walk with me. It wasn't a request. He moved down the hallway toward his corner office, and after a moment's hesitation, Karen followed. What else could she do? He was still her boss for the next 57 minutes until her resignation became official. His office was exactly what she'd expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, furniture that cost more than her annual salary, and shelves lined with legal tomes and first-edition books that suggested he actually read for pleasure. A Modigliani sketch hung on one wall, probably worth more than her apartment building. Alfred closed the door behind them. The click of the latch sounded unnaturally loud. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Karen sat, crossed her ankles, folded her hands in her lap, prepared for whatever lecture or dismissal was coming. Alfred didn't sit. Instead, he moved to the windows, hands in his pockets, gazing out at the autumn morning. The silence stretched for 30 seconds, 45, a full minute. Finally, he spoke. "You did excellent work on the Pemberton merger." Of all the things she'd expected him to say, that wasn't one of them. "Thank you," she managed. "Your analysis was thorough, your strategy sound, your presentation, until the unfortunate interruption, was confident and well-structured." He turned to face her. "Michael was planning to recommend you for junior partner at next month's review." Was. Past tense. Karen's chest tightened. "I understand that's no longer possible." "On the contrary." Alfred moved to his desk, leaning against the edge, arms crossed. "I think we can salvage this situation if you're willing to be creative." Warning bells chimed in Karen's head. "Creative? I have a problem, Ms. Monroe, and I believe you might be the solution." She waited, her pulse doing complicated things. "In 6 weeks, I'm attending a series of business events across Europe," he continued. "Vienna, Monaco, Paris, Milan. High-level negotiations, charity galas, opera premieres, the kind of tedious social theatre that's essential for closing deals but insufferable to endure alone." He paused, his gaze locked on hers. "I need someone to accompany me. Someone intelligent, presentable and capable of holding her own in complex social situations." Karen blinked. "You want me to be your date? I want you to be my companion. There's a difference." His voice remained perfectly neutral, but something in his eyes suggested he was enjoying this. "You would attend events with me, facilitate introductions, provide legal insight when needed, and generally ensure I don't spend 6 weeks wanting to throw myself off various European balconies." "I don't understand. Why me?" "Because you're good at your job. Because you're not intimidated by me, or at least not enough to stop you from having opinions." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "And because after this morning's excitement, the entire firm believes we're already involved, we might as well use that to our advantage." "That's insane." Karen stood, needing to move. People will think exactly what we want them to think, that we're navigating a complicated attraction while maintaining professionalism." He straightened, moving closer. "Here's what I'm proposing, Ms. Monroe. You accompany me to Europe. 6 weeks, all expenses paid, with your regular salary continuing plus a $50,000 bonus upon successful completion." $50,000. Karen's student loans flashed through her mind, her mother's medical bills, the apartment she couldn't quite afford but refused to leave because it had a window that caught morning light. "And if I refuse?" she asked quietly. "Then you submit your resignation, as you suggested. We both know that after this morning, staying at the firm would be uncomfortable. The gossip alone would undermine your authority." He paused, letting that truth settle. "But if you agree to my terms, I'll ensure your junior partnership goes through as planned. You'll have my full support and recommendation." It was blackmail dressed in business casual, manipulation wrapped in opportunity, and the most terrifying part was how tempting it sounded. "This is completely inappropriate," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Alfred moved to his desk, pulling out a document. "I had my assistant draft a contract, all terms clearly defined. This is a business arrangement, Ms. Monroe, not a proposition. You'll have your own accommodations, complete autonomy, and the right to terminate at any time." He handed her the contract. She scanned it, her lawyer brain automatically parsing the language. Everything he'd said was there, in writing, plus additional clauses about boundaries, expectations, and professional conduct. It was airtight, almost too airtight. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked, looking up from the pages. Something flickered across his face, vulnerability maybe, or exhaustion. "Because I'm tired of attending these events alone, because I'd rather spend 6 weeks with someone who challenges me than someone who simply agrees with everything I say. And because—" He hesitated, then continued with surprising honesty. "You called me arrogant, and you're right, but you also called me hot, which suggests your judgment isn't completely impaired." Despite everything, Karen felt a laugh escape. "That's your logic? I'm a simple man with simple needs." The corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been a real smile. 6 weeks, Ms. Monroe. Vienna to Paris, opera to yachts. Think of it as the world's most expensive apology tour. And if people ask about our relationship, we tell them the truth, that we're colleagues, exploring whether there might be something more, which technically is accurate. His eyes held hers. "Unless you lied in that text message, unless you don't actually find me attractive." The challenge hung in the air between them. Karen should have said no, should have walked out, preserved what remained of her dignity, found another firm. Should have recognized this for what it was, a dangerous blurring of every professional line she'd ever drawn. Instead, she heard herself say, "I need 48 hours to think about it." "You have 24. Alfred returned to his desk, picking up his phone, as if the conversation was already over. "Contract signed and on my desk by 4 o'clock tomorrow, or your resignation. Those are your options, Ms. Monroe." She stood there for a moment, the contract heavy in her hands, her future balanced on a precipice she'd never expected to face. "One question," she said finally. He looked up. "What happens if this becomes complicated? If the lines get blurred?" Alfred's expression was unreadable. "Then I suppose we'll discover whether you're as good at navigating complexity as your resume suggests." It wasn't an answer. It was a dare. Karen left his office with the contract burning a hole in her portfolio and her mind spinning through scenarios, each more dangerous than the last. The elevator ride down felt like descending into some alternate reality where nothing made sense and everything felt simultaneously like the biggest mistake and the most thrilling opportunity of her life. Jessica ambushed her the moment she reached her desk. "Oh my God, what did he say? Are you fired? Are you okay? The entire floor has been speculating and I told them all to shut up, but obviously that didn't work and—" "I'm not fired," Karen interrupted, sinking into her chair. "Then what?" "He offered me a contract." Jessica's eyes widened. "What kind of contract?" Karen pulled out the document, sliding it across the desk. Watched her best friend's face cycle through confusion, shock, disbelief, and something that looked like reluctant admiration. "He wants you to be his fake girlfriend for 6 weeks in Europe?" Jessica looked up, her voice pitched low. "Karen, this is insane." "I know. I was going to say straight out of a romance novel, but insane works too." Jessica flipped through the pages. "He's offering you $50,000 plus partnership track. Do you know how many associates would kill for this opportunity? Do you know how many ways this could destroy my career? Or make it?" Jessica leaned forward, her expression serious now. Look, I know this is weird and unprecedented, and probably violates about 17 HR policies that don't technically apply to partners. But Karen, when was the last time you took a risk? When was the last time you did something just because it terrified and excited you in equal measure? That's not how I make decisions. Maybe that's the problem. Jessica pushed the contract back. You've spent 3 years being perfect. Being professional, being exactly what everyone expects. And where has it gotten you? Still an associate, still proving yourself, still playing it safe. This isn't playing it safe. This is jumping off a cliff without a parachute. Or maybe, Jessica said softly, it's finally flying. Karen stared at the contract for a long moment. At the carefully worded clauses and the ridiculous number of zeros on the compensation line. At the signature blank, waiting for her decision. At the possibility of 6 weeks with a man who terrified and intrigued her in ways she didn't want to examine too closely. I have 24 hours to decide, she said finally. What does your gut say? That was the problem. Her gut was screaming 2 different things simultaneously. Run, stay, no, yes, safe, risk. Karen gathered her things, shoved the contract into her bag, and headed for the elevator. She needed air, space, perspective. Maybe a strong drink and a conversation with someone who wasn't actively invested in the drama. The October afternoon hit her like a slap as she emerged onto Fifth Avenue. The city pulsed around her, yellow cabs, street vendors, tourists, professionals, the endless rhythm of ambition and commerce that was Manhattan's heartbeat. Somewhere behind her, 43 floors up, Alfred Sinclair was probably already moving on to his next meeting, his next negotiation, his next calculated move. And she was standing on a street corner with a contract that could change everything, trying to decide whether she was brave enough or foolish enough to sign it. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but she knew who it was before she even opened it. The offer expires at 4 o'clock tomorrow, not a minute later. Choose wisely, Ms. Monroe. As Karen stared at those words until her vision blurred. Then she hailed a cab, gave her address, and spent the ride home trying to remember when her carefully planned life had become a Danielle Steele novel. And why? Despite every logical objection, her brain was screaming. Her heart was already whispering yes. Karen signed the contract at 3:58 the following afternoon. Not because she'd made a rational decision. Rationale had left the building the moment her text appeared on that conference room screen. Not because it was the smart move, though Jessica had spent 47 minutes the previous evening listing reasons why it absolutely was. She signed because at 3:57, staring at that signature line, she realized she was tired of being the person who always played it safe. Tired of wondering what might happen if she just once said yes to something terrifying. Tired of pretending she didn't feel electricity every time Alfred Sinclair walked into a room. His assistant, a formidable woman named Margaret, who'd probably seen everything twice, collected the contract without comment, though her eyes held what might have been approval or sympathy or both. Mr. Sinclair requests that you meet him at Teterboro Airport this Sunday at 1100 hours, Margaret said, handing Karen a thick envelope. Everything you need is inside. Itinerary, contact information, appropriate attire specifications. A stylist will visit your apartment Saturday morning to ensure your wardrobe is suitable. A stylist, Karen repeated faintly. Mr. Sinclair is very particular about presentation. Margaret's expression softened fractionally. Don't worry, dear. You'll be fine. Just remember he's far more human than he lets people believe. Which was either reassuring or terrifying. Karen couldn't decide which. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation that felt increasingly surreal. The stylist arrived at Karen's modest apartment in Hell's Kitchen with 6 rolling racks of designer clothing, transforming her bedroom into something resembling a high-end boutique. Dresses by Valentino and Givenchy, evening gowns that probably cost more than her car, casual wear that was somehow both effortless and obviously expensive. Mr. Sinclair's instructions were very specific. The stylist, a rail-thin woman named Claudette, who spoke with a French accent that might have been real, explained as she held up a midnight blue cocktail dress. Elegant but not ostentatious, classic but not boring, sexy but not obvious. "That's a lot of buts," Karen muttered. "Mr. Sinclair is a lot of man." Claudette's smile was knowing. "But I think you already knew that, yes?" Karen focused on the dresses and tried not to think about what she'd agreed to. By Saturday night, her apartment looked like a fashion magazine had exploded. Her suitcases, new, expensive, monogrammed, were packed with clothes she'd never have chosen for herself, but had to admit looked stunning. Her mother called from Portland, worried about this sudden business trip to Europe, and Karen lied smoothly, saying it was a career opportunity too good to pass up, which was technically true, just not in any way her mother would find reassuring. Sunday morning arrived cold and crystalline, the kind of October day that made New York feel like the center of the universe. Karen dressed carefully in tailored black pants, a cream silk blouse, and a camel cashmere coat that Claudette had insisted was perfect for traveling with a man who notices everything. The car service arrived at 9:30. A black Mercedes with a driver who loaded her luggage without comment and drove in silence through light Sunday traffic toward New Jersey. Teterboro Airport was where Manhattan's elite kept their private planes, and as they pulled through the security gates, Karen felt like she was crossing into some alternate dimension where normal rules didn't apply. The terminal was understated luxury, marble floors, leather seating, and the kind of quiet that money bought. A woman in a crisp uniform checked her passport, smiled professionally, and directed her to Gate 7, where a Gulfstream G650 stood gleaming in the morning sun, looking like something out of a magazine spread on How Billionaires Travel. And standing at the base of the stairs, checking his phone with that characteristic intensity, was Alfred Sinclair. He looked up as she approached, and something in his expression shifted. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation. He wore charcoal grey pants, a black sweater that did things to his shoulders that should have been illegal, and a leather jacket that probably cost more than her student loan payment. He looked, Karen thought with resignation, absolutely devastating. "Ms. Monroe," he said, pocketing his phone. "Punctual, I like that." "I'm terrified that if I'm late, you'll leave without me," she replied, before she could stop herself. His mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. "I don't leave assets behind, and for the next 6 weeks you're a very valuable asset." He gestured toward the plane. "Shall we?" The interior was exactly what Karen had expected, and somehow more. Cream leather seats that looked like they belonged in someone's living room, glossy wood paneling, and enough space to forget you were on a plane at all. A flight attendant appeared with champagne, which Alfred accepted, and Karen declined because it was 11 in the morning, and she was already feeling unmoored enough. "It's a 9-hour flight to Vienna," Alfred said once they were airborne, the Manhattan skyline falling away beneath them. "I suggest you get comfortable. We hit the ground running. Dinner with the Austrian Minister of Finance at 8, which means we need to be at the hotel by 6 at the latest." "Tonight?" Karen's eyes widened. "I thought we'd have time to adjust to the time difference. Time difference is for tourists." He pulled out his laptop, already shifting into work mode. "We're here for business, Ms. Monroe. The glamour is just packaging." It was a statement designed to remind her this was professional, transactional, not personal. So why did it feel like he was trying to convince himself as much as her? The flight passed in a strange liminal space, Alfred working on his laptop, occasionally asking her opinion on contract language or negotiation strategy, treating her exactly like the capable associate she was. But there were moments when his attention lingered a fraction too long, when their hands brushed, reaching for the same document, when she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. By the time they landed at Vienna International Airport, the sun was setting over the Alps, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that made the city look like a postcard from another era. A car waited on the tarmac, because of course it did. The drive into the city centre was a blur of Baroque architecture and elegant streets until they pulled up to the Hotel Imperial, a palace that had been converted into what was probably Vienna's most exclusive accommodation. "Your suite is on the 5th floor, Alfred said as they checked in, the receptionist practically bowing as she handed over keycards. "Mine is on the 6th. We meet in the lobby at 7:30. Wear the emerald green dress, the one with the high neck and the low back." He walked away before she could ask how he knew what was in her suitcase. Karen's suite was ridiculous, all gilt and marble and windows overlooking the Ringstrasse. She showered quickly, did her makeup with hands that trembled slightly, and pulled on the emerald dress that fit like it had been made for her body specifically, which it probably had been. The dress was stunning, elegant and sophisticated with just enough edge to be interesting. She twisted to see the back, which plunged in a deep V that exposed her spine, and felt her breath catch. This wasn't Karen Monroe, Yale law graduate and responsible professional. This was someone else entirely. Someone who wore designer dresses and flew on private jets and had dinner with finance ministers. Someone who was absolutely in over her head. 7:25. She grabbed the evening clutch that matched the dress, took one last look in the mirror, and headed downstairs. Alfred was waiting in the lobby, talking with someone in rapid German that sounded fluid and natural. He looked up as she approached, and whatever he'd been saying died mid-sentence. His eyes travelled over her, slowly, deliberately, missing nothing. "That dress," he said quietly, "was an excellent choice." "You chose it," Karen reminded him. "No, Claudette chose it. I just approved the selection." He offered his arm, surprisingly old-fashioned. "Ready to play your part?" She took his arm, feeling the solid warmth of him through the wool of his jacket. "What exactly is my part tonight?" Brilliant, charming, capable of discussing international finance and Austrian opera with equal fluency. His expression was serious, but his eyes held amusement. "Can you do that, Ms. Monroe?" "I can fake it." "Good. That's all anyone does at these things anyway." The dinner was held at Palais Ferstel, a 19th-century palace that had been converted into an event space where Vienna's elite gathered to see and be seen. Crystal chandeliers dripped light over tables dressed in white linen and silver that looked antique enough to be museum pieces. Men in tuxedos, women in gowns that cost more than cars, and an orchestra playing Strauss waltzes in the background. It was like stepping into another century, one where elegance and protocol still mattered. The finance minister, a silver-haired man named Werner Höllerer, who spoke perfect English with a slight British accent, greeted Alfred warmly and turned that same warm charm on Karen. "And who is this vision?" he asked, taking her hand with old-world courtesy. "Karen Monroe," Alfred said smoothly, "my associate and advisor. She's been instrumental in structuring our renewable energy investments." Which was true. She had worked on those deals. But the way Alfred said it made it sound like she was essential, not just competent. "Then we must hear your thoughts on Austria's green energy initiative," Werner said, leading them to their table. "Alfred tells me you have innovative ideas about public-private partnerships." Karen shot Alfred a look that said you didn't mention I'd be expected to discuss policy, but he just smiled blandly and pulled out her chair. Somehow, She made it through dinner. The conversation flowed between German and English, covering everything from solar subsidies to the Vienna Philharmonic's upcoming season. Karen found herself relaxing, engaging, even enjoying the intellectual sparring. Werner was smart and funny. His wife Greta was a retired opera singer with stories that had the table laughing, and Alfred was different here, smoother, yes, but also more relaxed. He laughed at Werner's jokes, asked Greta about her recordings, and occasionally touched Karen's arm when making a point, as if they were a team, partners, not boss and employee playing dress-up. "You two make a striking couple," Greta observed as dessert arrived. "Such a torte with schlagobers that tasted like chocolate dreams. How long have you been together?" Karen opened her mouth, but Alfred answered first. "We're still figuring that out," he said, his hand finding hers on the table. "It's new, complicated, but promising." His thumb brushed across her knuckles and Karen forgot how to breathe. "The best love stories always are," Greta said warmly. "Complicated and promising. That's how you know it's real." The rest of the evening passed in a champagne haze of conversation and music, and Alfred's hand warm against the small of her back as they said their goodbyes. The car ride back to the hotel was quiet, both of them processing the performance they'd just delivered. "You were impressive tonight," Alfred said finally as they entered the hotel lobby. "Werner mentioned he wants to include you in the next round of meetings." "Because I'm impressive, or because he thinks we're sleeping together?" Karen asked, too tired for diplomacy. Alfred stopped at the elevator bank, turning to face her. "Does it matter? You earned your place at that table, Ms. Monroe. Everything else is just context." "Context?" she repeated. "Is that what we're calling this arrangement? What would you call it?" The elevator arrived before she could answer. They rode up in silence, and when the doors opened on the 5th floor, Karen stepped out, then turned back. "Thank you," she said, "for tonight, for making me feel like more than just—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish. More than just what? More than just the girl who accidentally texted her way into this situation. Something shifted in Alfred's expression, vulnerability maybe, or recognition. "You were always more than that, Karen. I just gave you the opportunity to show it." He'd used her first name, not Ms. Monroe, Karen. The elevator doors started to close, and he caught them, holding them open. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow we have breakfast with a tech CEO, lunch with the Austrian Economic Council, and evening at the opera. The masquerade continues." But as Karen let herself into her suite and kicked off her heels and lay back on the bed, staring at the ornate ceiling, she wondered if masquerade was really the right word. Because tonight, for the first time in 3 years, she'd felt like herself. Not the careful, controlled version she presented at the firm, not the perfect associate who never made mistakes. Just Karen, smart, capable, worthy of being at that table. And the most terrifying part was how much of that feeling came from the way Alfred had looked at her, the way his hand had felt against her back, the way he'd said her name like it meant something. She fell asleep still wearing the emerald dress, dreaming of waltzes and chandeliers and steel blue eyes that saw too much. The next 3 weeks blurred into a montage of European excess that felt increasingly surreal. Monaco, where they attended a charity gala on a yacht longer than a city block, and Alfred bid 200,000 euros on a Picasso sketch just to prove a point to a Russian oligarch who'd been eyeing Karen all evening. Milan, where they had espresso in century-old cafes and met with fashion industry executives in showrooms filled with next season's collections. The Amalfi Coast, where they stayed in a villa built into the cliffs and had dinner on a terrace overlooking the Mediterranean, while discussing merger strategy and the strange intimacy of shared ambition. And Paris, always Paris at the end, because Paris was where everything either crystallized or shattered. They arrived on a Thursday evening in November. The city dressed in rain and streetlights and the particular magic that only Paris could conjure. Their hotel was in the 8th arrondissement, Le Bristol, because Alfred apparently didn't believe in staying anywhere that wasn't listed in world's best compilations. 2 more days, he said as they checked in, his voice carefully neutral. Then back to reality. Reality. The word landed heavy between them, because somewhere between Vienna and Paris, between state dinners and opera houses and late-night conversations on hotel terraces, something had shifted. The lines they'd so carefully drawn had blurred, then disappeared entirely. Karen had stopped thinking of this as a job, had stopped remembering this was temporary, had started imagining what it might be like if it wasn't. Tomorrow night is the final event, Alfred continued, pulling her from her thoughts. The Foundation Lumière Gala at the Musée d'Orsay. It's the most important of the trip. We're announcing a major investment partnership. I need you sharp. I'm always sharp, Karen said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. Alfred's eyes found hers, and for a moment the professional mask slipped. I know. That's one of the problems. He walked away before she could ask what he meant, leaving her standing in the lobby with her heart doing complicated things and her mind trying desperately to remember why falling for her boss was the worst possible idea. But Paris had other plans. And so, apparently, did Alfred Sinclair. Paris in November was a study in contrasts. Cold rain against warm cafe windows, grey skies that made the city's golden lights burn brighter. The weight of winter approaching mixed with the peculiar romance that only Paris could manufacture from melancholy. Karen woke Friday morning to rain drumming against her windows and a text from Alfred that read simply, "Breakfast, my sweet. 20 minutes, not a request. Never a request with him." She dressed in fitted black pants and a burgundy cashmere sweater, pulled her hair into a sleek ponytail, and tried to ignore the way her pulse accelerated at the thought of seeing him. 23 days of this arrangement, and she still hadn't developed immunity to Alfred Sinclair's presence. If anything, the exposure had made it worse. His suite was on the 7th floor, larger than hers, with views across the Jardin des Champs-Élysées and a terrace that probably cost more per night than most people's monthly rent. He answered the door in dark jeans and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking unfairly attractive for 8 in the morning. "Coffee's on the terrace," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "I thought we could review tonight's event details before the rest of the day buries us." The terrace was covered, protected from the rain but open enough to hear its rhythm. A table had been set with breakfast, croissants, fruit, eggs and coffee that smelled like heaven in a cup. Very intimate, very domestic, very much not what their contract had specified. Karen poured coffee and tried to focus on business. "The Lumière Gala. You're announcing the renewable energy partnership with Dubois Industries. 300 million euros, 70% equity stake, joint development of solar farms across France and Spain." "Correct." Alfred settled into the chair across from her, but his attention wasn't on the file he'd opened. It was on her. "And after the announcement, there will be press. Questions about us." "Us," Karen repeated carefully. "The rumors have reached Paris. Apparently we've been quite the topic of conversation among the European business community." Something flickered in his expression. "Werner Höller's wife has been telling everyone we're madly in love. The Milan crowd thinks we're having a torrid affair. Monaco is placing bets on when we'll get engaged." Karen's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. "That's problematic." "Is it?" Alfred leaned back, studying her with that unnerving intensity. "We've been playing this game for 3 weeks, Karen. At what point does the performance become the reality?" The use of her first name still did things to her nervous system she couldn't control. "The contract specifies—" she began. "Forget the contract." He stood abruptly, moving to the terrace railing, rain misting just beyond the covering. "Tell me honestly, these past 3 weeks, the dinners, the conversations, the moments between the business, has it all been acting for you?" The question hung in the rain-thick air between them. Karen could have lied, should have lied, could have maintained the professional distance that was the only thing protecting her from complete disaster. Instead, she set down her coffee and joined him at the railing. "No," she said quietly. "It hasn't all been acting." Alfred's jaw tightened. "That's what I was afraid of." Afraid? The word stung more than it should have. Is the idea of this being real so terrifying? Yes. He turned to face her, and for the first time since she'd met him, Alfred Sinclair looked uncertain, vulnerable, human. "Because I don't do this, Karen. I don't blur lines. I don't mix business with anything resembling emotion, and I certainly don't fall for associates who accidentally text their way into my life." "Fall for," she repeated, her heart suddenly hammering. "Is that what you're saying? That you've—" "Don't." His voice was rough. "Don't make me say it. Don't make this more complicated than it already is. It's been complicated since Vienna, maybe since that conference room in New York." Karen stepped closer, tired of dancing around what was becoming increasingly obvious. "You felt it too. In Monaco, when that Russian oligarch wouldn't stop staring at me, and you got so tense I thought you'd break your champagne glass. In Milan, when we stayed up until 3 in the morning arguing about contract law, and you looked at me like I was the most fascinating person you'd ever met. On the Amalfi Coast, when we almost kissed," Alfred finished. "And I walked away, because I knew if I didn't, everything would change. Everything's already changed." "Has it?" He moved closer, close enough that she could see the silver threads in his blue eyes, the fine lines that suggested he smiled more than his reputation indicated. "Or have we just convinced ourselves that pretending to be in love is the same thing as actually being in love?" "Is there a difference?" Karen asked. "When it feels this real?" "There's always a difference. Real has consequences. Real means risking things that matter." His hand lifted, almost touching her face, then fell back to his side. "I can't offer you what you deserve, Karen. I'm not built for relationships. Ask anyone who's tried. My ex-wife, my family, the handful of women who thought they could crack the code. I'm good at business, at strategy, at keeping everything controlled and measured and safe." "You don't feel safe," she whispered. "No." His laugh was bitter. "You feel like jumping off a cliff without knowing if there's water at the bottom. You feel like every carefully constructed wall I've built around myself is made of paper. You feel like the biggest risk I've ever taken, and I've bet billions on ventures that could have destroyed me." Rain drummed steadily beyond the terrace. Inside the suite, a clock chimed 8:30. Somewhere in the city, Paris was waking up, getting coffee, living ordinary lives that didn't involve emotional minefields disguised as business arrangements. "So, what do we do?" Karen asked. Alfred's eyes held hers for a long moment. "We get through tonight. We announce the partnership. We finish what we started." His voice softened. "And then we go back to New York and figure out if any of this survives reality." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even a promise, but it was honest, which was somehow more than she'd expected. "Okay," she said finally. "Tonight, then reality." "Tonight," he agreed. "Wear the silver dress, the one with the I know which one." She stepped back, needing distance before she did something catastrophic like kiss him. "What time do we leave?" 7. The gala starts at 8, but we need time for photos and pre-event press. He returned to professional mode like flipping a switch, though his eyes still held heat. "Jean-Marc Dubois will want to meet you before the announcement. He's old-fashioned, Values family, loyalty, tradition. The fact that he paused. Whatever we are, it will matter to him. So we keep playing the part. One more night, Alfred said, then no more pretending. Karen left his suite with her mind spinning and her heart somewhere in her throat. One more night, one more performance. Then they'd have to face whatever this had become without the excuse of business justification. The day passed in a blur of last-minute preparations. Karen reviewed the press materials, confirmed details with Alfred's Paris team, and tried not to think about how, in 24 hours, everything would be different. The safety net of their arrangement would be gone, and they'd be left with just the raw truth of whatever existed between them. By 6:30 that evening, she was dressed in the silver gown, a stunning piece of architectural fashion that somehow looked both modern and timeless, with a neckline that plunged dangerously and fabric that caught the light like liquid mercury. Her hair was swept up in an elegant twist. Diamond earrings borrowed from the hotel's jewelry service glittered at her ears, and when she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. This woman looked confident, powerful, like she belonged in this world of galas and partnerships and men who could buy buildings with a phone call. This woman looked like she might actually deserve Alfred Sinclair. The car arrived at 6:55. Alfred was already inside, and when Karen slid in beside him, his expression did something complicated. "That dress," he said, his voice low, "should be illegal." "You picked it," she reminded him. "I'm regretting that decision, for entirely selfish reasons." His eyes traveled over her slowly, deliberately. "You're going to be the most stunning woman at the gala, which is strategically perfect and personally torturous." "Good," Karen said, surprising herself. "Maybe you should suffer a little." His laugh was genuine, warm, the kind she'd heard more of in the past 3 weeks than probably the previous 3 years combined. "Fair enough." The Musée d'Orsay at night was breathtaking. The converted railway station lit like a jewel box, its famous clock face glowing above the Seine. Red carpet stretched up the steps, photographers already lined up, and guests in evening wear moved through the entrance like a river of elegance and wealth. "Ready?" Alfred offered his arm. "No," Karen admitted, "but let's do it anyway." The cameras started flashing the moment they stepped out of the car. Questions in French and English, people shouting Alfred's name, and then someone spotted Karen and the attention intensified. Who is she? Is she his girlfriend? Are they engaged? Alfred handled it with practiced ease, guiding her up the red carpet with a hand at her back, stopping for strategic photos, answering questions with carefully vague responses that confirmed nothing but denied nothing either. Inside, the museum had been transformed into a fantasy of light and luxury. The main gallery, with its soaring glass ceiling and rows of impressionist masterpieces, now held cocktail tables and a string quartet playing something haunting and beautiful. Waiters circulated with champagne, guests clustered in groups discussing business and gossip in equal measure, and the energy hummed with the particular frequency of power and money in close quarters. Jean-Marc Dubois appeared within minutes, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and warm eyes who embraced Alfred like family. "Mon ami," he said, then turned that warmth on Karen. "And this must be the brilliant Karen I have heard so much about." "Monsieur Dubois!" Karen accepted his hand, managing to remember the French greeting Claudette had taught her. "C'est un plaisir de vous rencontrer." His smile widened. "Alfred said you were special. I see he was correct." He switched to English, his accent charming. "You must tell me, how did you convince this workaholic to finally bring someone to one of these events? He has been alone at every gala for 5 years. "I'm very persuasive," Karen said, and felt Alfred's hand tighten imperceptibly at her waist. "Indeed." Jean-Marc's eyes twinkled with knowing amusement. Well, I hope you will persuade him to take more vacations, to spend less time in boardrooms and more time enjoying life. A man needs balance, yes? I couldn't agree more, Karen replied, even as she wondered what Alfred's life had been like before this arrangement, before her. The evening progressed with champagne toasts and small talk, and the careful dance of business relationships, disguised as social pleasantries. Karen met ministers and CEOs, artists and philanthropists, and discovered she was surprisingly good at this. The performance of sophistication, the art of interesting conversation that revealed nothing while appearing to reveal everything. But beneath it all, she was hyper-aware of Alfred, the way he never strayed far from her side, the way his hand found the small of her back whenever they moved through the crowd. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, with something that went far beyond their professional arrangement. At 9:30, the announcement came. Alfred took the stage with Jean-Marc, and Karen watched from the crowd as he outlined the partnership that would bring sustainable energy to millions. He was brilliant, commanding every inch the visionary CEO the business world believed him to be. And when he finished, when the applause died down, he found her in the crowd. Held her gaze across 30 feet of museum space and 300 guests. The rest of the gala blurred. More congratulations, more champagne, more smiling, until her face hurt. Finally, mercifully, it was past midnight and socially acceptable to leave. The car ride back to the hotel was silent, not uncomfortable, but weighted with everything unsaid. The rain had stopped, leaving Paris washed clean and gleaming, and as they crossed the Seine, Karen thought about how 24 hours ago she'd been one person, and now she was someone else entirely. They walked through the hotel lobby together, took the elevator up in charged silence. When the doors opened on her floor, Karen stepped out, then turned back. "Tonight was," she began. "Perfect," Alfred finished. "You were perfect. So were you." He stepped forward, holding the elevator doors open, his eyes intense in the low light. "Karen, about this morning, what I said—" "Don't." She shook her head. "Don't take it back. Don't make it complicated. We agreed. Tonight, then reality. And what if I don't want to wait for reality?" His voice was rough, raw, in a way she'd never heard. "What if I'm tired of pretending this is just business?" Her heart stopped, started, raced ahead. "Alfred, come to my suite," he said quietly. "Not for business, not for the contract, just come." It was the most dangerous invitation she'd ever received, and the easiest answer she'd ever given. "Okay," Karen whispered. They rode up one floor in silence that crackled with possibility. His suite door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like a decision, like a point of no return. Alfred moved to the windows, hands in his pockets, looking out at Paris. "I need to tell you something. About why I've been alone for 5 years, about why this terrifies me." Karen waited, her heart pounding. "My ex-wife," he began, his voice carefully controlled. "Victoria, we married young. I was 27, she was 25. Everyone said we were perfect together, both ambitious, both driven, both willing to sacrifice everything for success." He paused. "Turns out, when you sacrifice everything, there's nothing left to build a marriage on." What happened? She wanted children. A family, normal things that normal people want. His reflection in the window showed strain. "I wanted the next deal, the next victory. I thought I had time, thought I could have both." A bitter laugh. "I was wrong. By the time I realized what I'd lost, she'd already filed for divorce, told me I was married to my work, and she refused to be the mistress." "Alfred, she was right," he continued. "I am married to my work. It's the one thing I'm actually good at. The one thing that doesn't require vulnerability or risk, or any of the qualities that make relationships work." He turned to face her. "And then you walked into my life. You with your accidental text, and your brilliant mind, and your complete inability to be intimidated by me. And for the first time in 5 years, I wanted something more than the next deal." Karen's throat tightened. "What do you want?" "You." The word was simple, devastating. "I want you, Karen Monroe, not as my associate. Not as part of some arrangement, just you." The distance between them felt both infinite and non-existent. "But I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know how to be what you need. I'm still the workaholic who'll miss dinners for conference calls. I'm still the man who thinks in terms of strategy and risk mitigation. I haven't magically transformed into someone who knows how to navigate relationships." "I don't need you to transform," Karen said, moving closer. "I need you to be honest, to try to not walk away when it gets complicated. It's already complicated. Then we figure it out." She was standing in front of him now, close enough to see the vulnerability in his eyes. Together, no contracts, no performance, just two people who accidentally found something real in the middle of all this pretending. Alfred's hand lifted to her face, fingers tracing her jawline with devastating gentleness. "This could destroy everything. Your career. Mine. The partnership we've built. Or," Karen whispered, "it could be the beginning of something worth the risk." For a long moment, they stood suspended in possibility. Paris gleamed beyond the windows. The rain had started again, a soft percussion against glass. And in a hotel suite 7 floors above the city of light, 2 people who'd spent weeks pretending finally stopped. Alfred kissed her. It was nothing like she'd imagined, not aggressive or demanding, but achingly tender. Like he was memorizing the moment, like she was something precious that might break. Karen's hands found his shirt, pulling him closer, and the kiss deepened. Weeks of tension and denial and carefully maintained distance dissolved into heat and hunger and the intoxicating reality of finally giving in. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Alfred pressed his forehead to hers. "No more pretending," he said. "No more pretending," she agreed. They spent the rest of the night on his terrace, wrapped in blankets against the November cold, talking about everything and nothing. About childhoods and dreams and failures and fears, about what they wanted from life beyond success, about whether love could survive in the harsh reality of their world. And somewhere around 4 in the morning, watching the first hints of dawn touch the Paris skyline, Karen realized she'd already fallen. Had probably been falling since that mortifying moment in the conference room when her world exploded and his carefully controlled facade cracked just enough to let her see the man beneath. "We fly back to New York tomorrow," Alfred said quietly. "Today," he corrected, checking his watch. "In 11 hours. "I know. Everything changes when we land." "I know that too." He pulled her closer, his chin resting on top of her head. "I can't promise this will be easy, or that I won't mess it up spectacularly. I'm not asking for promises," Karen said. "I'm asking for honesty, and maybe a chance to see where this goes without contracts and contingencies and exit strategies." "No exit strategy," he repeated. "That's terrifying." "Good, maybe you should suffer a little." His laugh rumbled through his chest, and Karen smiled against him, feeling like maybe, possibly, they could figure this out. But she didn't know about the email waiting in Alfred's inbox. The one from the firm's managing committee. The one that would force them to choose between their careers and each other. She didn't know that reality was about to be far more complicated than either of them imagined. The flight back to New York felt different. Everything looked the same. The leather seats, the champagne. Karen still didn't drink at 11 in the morning, the clouds stretching endlessly below them. But the air between her and Alfred had changed frequency. No more careful distance, no more professional boundaries that neither of them believed anymore. He worked on his laptop while she reviewed documents, but their legs touched under the table. His hand found hers during turbulence over the Atlantic, and when she dozed off somewhere over Greenland, she woke to find his jacket draped over her shoulders and his eyes on her with an expression that made her chest ache. "What?" she asked, still sleep-fuzzy. "Nothing." But his voice was soft. "Just thinking about how 3 weeks ago I thought this was the worst idea I'd ever had. And now I think it might be the best." He closed his laptop, giving her his full attention. "Though I reserve the right to panic when we land and reality sets in." Reality. The word had been haunting them since Paris. They landed at JFK at 4:30 on a grey Saturday afternoon, the city skyline emerging from November clouds like a familiar threat. No photographers this time. No red carpets or champagne or pretense. Just two people returning to a life that suddenly felt too small for what they'd discovered. Alfred's driver took them into Manhattan, and the silence grew heavier with each mile. By the time they reached Karen's building in Hell's Kitchen, the weight of unsaid things filled the car like smoke. "I'll see you Monday," she asked, hating how uncertain she sounded. "Monday." He caught her hand before she could exit. "Karen, whatever happens at the firm, whatever anyone says, we figure it out together. Agreed?" Agreed. But the kiss he gave her felt like goodbye. Monday morning arrived with the kind of cold rain that made New York feel hostile. Karen dressed carefully in her sharpest suit, Navy Armani, the one that meant business, and tried to ignore the knot in her stomach that had been tightening since Saturday. She'd checked her email obsessively all weekend, but there was nothing from Alfred. Nothing from the firm, just the normal weekend quiet that felt anything but normal. The elevator ride to the 43rd floor felt like ascending to judgment. She stepped out into the familiar reception area and immediately sensed something wrong. Conversations stopped. Eyes tracked her across the floor. Jessica appeared at her elbow within 30 seconds. "Conference room. Now," Jessica whispered urgently. "Michael Reed wants to see you. And Karen, he doesn't look happy." The knot became a fist. Michael Reed's corner office was all glass and steel and uncomfortable leather chairs designed to make you confess sins you didn't know you'd committed. He sat behind his desk, looking every one of his 62 years, and his expression was a masterclass in disappointed authority. "Ms. Monroe, sit." Karen sat. "I'm going to be direct," Michael began. "Over the weekend, we received some interesting communications, photos from European publications, gossip from business contacts, and a rather detailed email from a senior partner at our Paris affiliate office, all concerning your 6-week trip with Alfred." Her stomach dropped. "I want to hear your version of events," Michael continued, "before I make any decisions about your future at this firm. Mr. Reed, did you or did you not enter into a romantic relationship with Alfred Sinclair while serving as his associate on business travel?" The question hung like an axe. Karen could have lied, could have claimed it was all performance, all strategy, all part of the arrangement Alfred had designed, could have hidden behind the contract and technicalities and plausible deniability. But she was so tired of pretending. "Yes," she said clearly, "I did." Michael's jaw tightened. "You understand this is a direct violation of firm policy. Associates do not engage in romantic relationships with senior partners. The power dynamic alone makes it problematic, not to mention the ethical concerns, the potential for favoritism, "I understand all of that," Karen interrupted, then caught herself. "I apologize. But with respect, this situation is more complicated than it appears. Enlighten me." So she did. She explained the initial arrangement, how Alfred had offered her a way to salvage her career after the conference room disaster, how it was supposed to be purely professional, how somewhere between Vienna and Paris, pretending had become real. Michael listened without expression, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "And where is Alfred in all this?" he asked when she finished. "Does he share your version of events?" "I don't know," Karen admitted. "We haven't spoken since we returned." "How convenient." Michael stood, moving to his windows overlooking the city. "Ms. Monroe, I'm going to be frank with you. The managing committee met this morning. The consensus is that this situation requires immediate resolution. We are prepared to offer you a choice. A choice. You can end whatever relationship you've started with Alfred immediately and completely. Maintain strict professional distance, in which case we'll proceed with your junior partnership as planned, and this incident will be noted but not held against you. Karen's throat tightened. And the alternative? You resign, effective immediately. We'll provide a generous severance package, excellent references that make no mention of this situation, and our best wishes for your future career. His eyes were kind, but unyielding. But you cannot have both, Ms. Monroe. You cannot be a partner at this firm and involved with Alfred Sinclair. The optics alone would be catastrophic. The office fell silent, except for the rain against the windows. 3 years, 80-hour weeks, every sacrifice she'd made to get here. The partnership she'd earned through work that had nothing to do with Alfred, all of it balanced against 3 weeks in Europe, and the way her heart felt when he looked at her. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked quietly. "End of business today." Michael returned to his desk. "I'm sorry, Karen, truly, but this firm has survived 68 years by maintaining standards. We can't make exceptions, no matter how inconvenient." Karen left his office on autopilot, her mind spinning. Jessica ambushed her immediately, pulling her into an empty conference room. "What did he say?" "They want me to choose, the partnership or Alfred." "Oh my God!" Jessica sank into a chair. "Karen, that's impossible?" "Yes." Karen pressed her palms against the cool glass, staring out at Manhattan. 3 years of my life versus 3 weeks with a man who might break my heart. Seems like an easy choice, right? Is it? That was the problem. It wasn't. Because the partnership she'd wanted so desperately 3 weeks ago suddenly felt hollow, empty, like achieving something that no longer mattered in the way it once had. "I need to talk to Alfred," Karen said finally. "He's in his office. Been there since 7 this morning, according to Margaret." Jessica hesitated. "Karen, whatever you decide, I support you. But just remember, partnerships come and go. What you felt in Europe, that doesn't happen every day." Karen took the elevator to the 44th floor with her heart in her throat. Margaret looked up as she approached, her expression sympathetic. "He's expecting you," she said quietly. "Go on in." Alfred's office looked exactly as it had that day 4 weeks ago when he'd made his proposition. Same view, same expensive furniture, same man standing at the windows, hands in pockets, looking like he carried the weight of every decision he'd ever made. He turned as she entered, and the expression on his face told her he already knew. "They gave you an ultimatum," he said. "Yes." "Partnership or me?" "Yes." Alfred's jaw tightened. "And I'm guessing they made it very clear which choice they expect you to make." Michael was diplomatic, but yes. Karen closed the door behind her, needing privacy for whatever came next. "They're not wrong, Alfred. The power dynamic, the optics, everything they're concerned about is valid." "I know." He moved away from the windows, but kept distance between them, professional distance. "That's why I've already drafted my resignation." Karen's heart stopped. "What?" I'm not going to let you sacrifice your career because I couldn't keep things professional. His voice was carefully controlled, but his eyes betrayed him. You earned that partnership, Karen. You earned it through brilliant work and dedication that had nothing to do with me. I won't be the reason you lose it. So you'll just quit? Walk away from the firm you helped build? I'll start over. I've done it before. A ghost of a smile. Besides, I'm a liability now. My judgment is compromised. I made a business decision based on emotion, which is the first sign of weakness in our world. Loving someone isn't weakness, Karen said. The word hung between them. Loving. Alfred's composure cracked. Don't make this harder than it already is. Why not? Why can't I say what we both know is true? She moved closer, tired of distance and pretense and protecting feelings that were already bruised. I love you, Alfred. I think I've been falling since that conference room when you didn't fire me. Maybe before. Karen. And I think you love me too, even though it terrifies you, even though it doesn't fit in your carefully controlled world. She stopped in front of him, close enough to see the war in his eyes. So here's what I think we should do. We both walk away. He went very still. What? Not from each other, from the firm. Her heart pounded, but her voice stayed steady. You resign. I resign. We start over somewhere that doesn't have policies about who we can love. That's insane. You'd throw away 3 years of work for something that matters more. Karen reached for his hand, felt it tremble slightly in hers. You told me in Paris you didn't know how to do relationships, that you'd mess it up. Well, here's how we start. By choosing each other even when it's hard, even when it costs us something, especially then. Alfred stared at her like she'd suggested they jump off the building. You'd give up your partnership, for me. For us, there's a difference. She smiled, feeling suddenly, impossibly certain. We're brilliant lawyers, Alfred. We'll find other firms, build other careers. But this, she gestured between them. This doesn't come along twice. You're going to regret this, he said, but his hand tightened on hers. Probably, but I'd regret the alternative more. Karen took a breath, feeling like she was jumping off that cliff he'd described. So what do you say? Ready to be reckless with me? For a long moment, Alfred just looked at her. Then something shifted in his expression. Surrender, maybe, or relief. Or the simple recognition that some risks were worth taking. I say, he pulled her closer, that you're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish. Can't it be both? His laugh was real, warm, full of something that felt like hope. Michael is going to have a heart attack. Let him. We'll send flowers. Alfred kissed her then, deep and thorough and utterly inappropriate for a partner's office at 9:15 on a Monday morning. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. I love you, he said quietly. I should have said it in Paris. I should have said it the moment I knew. You're saying it now. That's what matters. They drafted their resignations together, sitting side by side at his desk, occasionally stopping to kiss or laugh or marvel at the complete insanity of what they were doing. By noon, they'd submitted them to the managing committee with effective dates 2 weeks out. Michael's response came within an hour, a request to meet immediately. They went together this time, hand in hand, and faced the committee with the kind of courage that comes from knowing you've already made your choice. I don't understand, Michael said, looking between them. We gave you an out, Karen, a way to salvage your career. I know, and I appreciate it. Karen's voice was steady. But I've realized something over the past few weeks. I've spent 3 years building a career at a firm that expects me to choose between professional success and personal happiness. I don't want to work somewhere that makes that choice necessary. That's very idealistic, another partner, Sandra Chen, interjected. and unrealistic. Every firm has policies about workplace relationships. Then maybe the policies need rethinking, Alfred said calmly. Karen Monroe is one of the best associates this firm has ever had. If we're willing to lose talent like hers because she fell in love, then perhaps we need to examine our priorities. This isn't just about love, Michael said. It's about ethics, power dynamics, the appearance of favoritism. Then establish oversight, create protocols, require disclosure and third-party reviews. Karen leaned forward, engaging despite herself. But don't force talented people to choose between their careers and their personal lives. That's how you lose the people you can't afford to lose. The committee exchanged glances, some skeptical, some thoughtful. You've given this considerable thought, Sandra observed. We had a long flight back from Paris, Alfred replied dryly. Michael sighed, rubbing his temples. 30 years ago, I met my wife at this firm. She was an associate. I was a junior partner. We hid it for 2 years before finally going public. He looked up, his expression softer than Karen had ever seen. It was hell, the secrecy, the fear. But we made it work, and eventually the firm accepted it because we were both too valuable to lose. Times have changed, Sandra said. Have they? Michael asked, or are we still asking people to make impossible choices? He turned to Karen and Alfred. Here's what I'm proposing. You don't resign. We don't terminate. Instead, we create a pilot program, disclosed relationships with mandatory oversight and third-party review of any joint projects. You two will be the test case. Karen's breath caught. You'd do that? I'd try it, Michael corrected. With strict conditions. Karen transfers to a different practice group, corporate rather than M&A. No more working directly with Alfred. Quarterly reviews with an ethics committee. And if there's any hint of impropriety or favoritism, this arrangement ends immediately. It wasn't perfect, but it was a chance. Karen looked at Alfred, saw her own hope reflected in his eyes. We accept, they said simultaneously. 18 months later, the June evening was perfect. Warm without being oppressive, the kind of Manhattan night that made you remember why you fell in love with the city in the first place. Karen stood on the terrace of their apartment overlooking Central Park, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Behind her, through the open doors, she could hear Alfred on a conference call, his voice patient as he explained something to a client. He'd made partner at a boutique environmental law firm 6 months ago, doing work he actually cared about rather than just winning for winning's sake. Karen had made junior partner at Sinclair & Reed, 3 months after their return from Paris. The oversight program had worked, awkwardly at first, with quarterly meetings that felt like relationship therapy conducted by lawyers. But gradually, it had proven itself. Other couples had come forward, relieved to finally be open. The firm had adapted, and she and Alfred had thrived. Sorry about that, Alfred said, emerging onto the terrace and wrapping his arms around her from behind. Client crisis in California, but it's handled now. You're getting better at work-life balance, Karen observed. I have excellent motivation. He kissed her neck. Speaking of which, have you thought about my proposal? Which one? You make a lot of proposals these days. The one about us taking 2 weeks off in August. Real vacation. No laptops, no phones, just us and somewhere tropical with beach access. Karen turned in his arms, looping her hands around his neck. I thought we could go back to Paris instead, see it without the work pressure, just 2 people being tourists. Paris. His smile was soft. I like that idea. We could stay at that little hotel in the Marais you mentioned. Eat croissants, argue about impressionism. Fall more in love, Karen added quietly, as if that's possible. But his eyes said otherwise, said he fell more in love every day, said choosing her had been the easiest hard decision he'd ever made. They stood there as the sun set over the city, two people who'd accidentally found each other and deliberately chosen to stay. It hadn't been easy. The oversight meetings, the gossip that took months to die down, the adjustments they'd both had to make to balance demanding careers with an even more demanding relationship. But it had been worth it. Every difficult conversation, every compromise, every moment of choosing love over convenience. Inside the apartment, Karen's phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Drinks Thursday. I need all the details about the vacation planning, and maybe advice because I might be accidentally dating someone from accounting and I'm freaking out." Karen laughed, showing Alfred the message. "Should we tell her about the oversight program?" he asked. "Absolutely, and then we'll offer to help her navigate it." Karen leaned into him, feeling grateful and lucky and impossibly happy. Because that's what you do when you find something real. You fight for it. You protect it. You help others find it too. "When did you become such a romantic?" Alfred teased. "Around the time I accidentally called my boss a hot, arrogant guy and changed my entire life." She kissed him, tasting champagne and possibility and the future they were still writing together. "Best mistake I ever made." "Second best," Alfred corrected. "The best was saying yes to 6 weeks in Europe with a stranger." "You weren't a stranger. You were my devastatingly handsome, impossible, completely worth it boss who turned out to be even better when I got to know him. Even when I mess up? When I work too late or forget anniversaries or need reminding that relationships require actual effort? Especially then." Karen smiled against his mouth. "Because you always figure it out. You always come back. You always choose us, even when it's hard." "Always," Alfred promised. "No exit strategy." "Remember, no exit strategy," she agreed. And as the last light faded from the New York sky and the city began its nightly transformation into a constellation of dreams, Karen thought about that conference room 4.5 years ago, about the moment that had felt like career-ending catastrophe but had actually been the beginning of everything that mattered. About how sometimes the most embarrassing mistakes led to the most beautiful love stories. About how real love didn't follow contracts or policies or carefully laid plans. It just was, messy and complicated and absolutely worth every risk. And about how calling your boss a hot, arrogant guy in front of the entire executive team might be the worst professional decision you ever made. But loving him, that was the best decision of all.